Elena's alarm blared at 5:30 a.m., cutting through the quiet morning darkness. She reached out with heavy arms to silence it, allowing herself just 10 more seconds of rest before forcing her tired body to rise. The small one-bedroom apartment was cold. She kept the heat low to save on bills. Another day, she whispered to herself, running her fingers through her tangled dark hair as she sat on the edge of her bed. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she made her way to the kitchen. Elena filled the kettle and placed it on the stove, then tiptoed to the living room where her grandmother slept on the fold-out couch. At 78, Nana Lucia needed more care with each passing month. The medication for her heart condition alone cost more than Elena could comfortably afford, but she always found a way. "Good morning, sunshine," Nana Lucia said, her voice raspy with sleep. Despite her health troubles, her eyes still sparkled with life. "Morning, Nana, did I wake you? I was trying to be quiet. These old ears hear everything. Are you off to work already?" Elena nodded, pouring hot water over a tea bag for her grandmother. Morning shift at the Gilded Rose, then evening shift too. Jorge called in sick. 2 shifts again? "You're working too hard, my girl." Elena handed her grandmother the steaming mug and kissed her forehead. "We need the money. Besides, double shifts mean double tips." The truth was more complicated. The Gilded Rose was the most expensive restaurant in town, where the wealthy came to show off and be seen. On a good night, Elena could make more in tips than 3 days at a regular diner. But serving the rich came with its own problems. The constant judgment, the occasional humiliation, the feeling of being invisible unless she made a mistake. Elena showered quickly, letting the warm water wash away her exhaustion for a brief moment. As she dressed in her crisp white shirt and black pants, the uniform for the Gilded Rose, her eyes drifted to the stack of music books on her small desk. She ran her fingers along the worn spine of her favorite Chopin collection, allowing herself a moment of longing. On her wall hung 3 framed certificates, reminders of a different path her life might have taken. National Youth Piano Competition, 1st place. Regional Classical Music Scholarship. National Conservatory admission. The last one hurt the most to look at. 3 years ago, she'd been accepted with a partial scholarship to the country's most prestigious music school. 2 weeks later, Nana Lucia had her first heart attack, and everything changed. Maybe someday, she told herself. As she did every morning, Elena prepared a simple breakfast for her grandmother and left out her morning pills with clear instructions written on a notepad. Mrs. Patel from next door would check in around lunchtime, a kindness Elena repaid by tuning the old piano Mrs. Patel kept for her grandchildren's visits. "I'll be back after the dinner shift." "Around 11, Elena said, grabbing her bag. "Call me if you need anything." "Play something before you go," Nana Lucia asked. It was their morning ritual when time allowed. "I'm running late, Nana. Just a little something." For these old ears, Elena couldn't resist. She sat at their second-hand upright piano, a treasure found at a yard sale years ago. The finish was worn and it needed tuning more often than they could afford, but it was hers. Her fingers found the keys without thought, and she played a short piece by Debussy, Clair de Lune. Just the opening minute, but it was enough to fill the small apartment with something beautiful. "That's my girl," Nana Lucia said, her eyes closed in appreciation. "You play like your mother." Elena smiled sadly at the comparison. Her mother had been a promising pianist too, before life took her in different directions. Before she left them both behind for a new start somewhere else. The bus ride downtown took 40 minutes. Elena used the time to study music theory from a dog-eared textbook she'd bought secondhand. Learning on her own wasn't ideal, but she refused to give up completely. Twice a week she practiced at the community center after her shifts, when the ancient piano there was available. Once a month she splurged on a proper lesson with Mr. Chen, a retired music teacher who charged her less than his other students because, as he put it, talent like yours shouldn't go to waste. The Gilded Rose stood like a palace among the downtown buildings, with its marble steps and gold-trimmed doors. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables covered in pristine white tablecloths. The restaurant didn't officially open until 11 a.m., but servers arrived by 7 to begin the elaborate preparation. "You're cutting it close," said Diane, the floor manager, checking her watch as Elena hurried through the staff entrance. "Sorry, bus was running late," Elena replied, hanging up her coat in the cramped break room and tying her apron around her waist. She pulled her hair back into a neat bun. The Gilded Rose had strict standards about appearance. The morning passed in a blur of polishing already spotless silverware, folding napkins into perfect shapes and memorizing the day's specials. Dishes with French names and outrageous prices. By the time the doors opened for lunch service, Elena's feet already ached. The lunch crowd at the Gilded Rose consisted mainly of business people making deals over expensive meals. Elena moved between tables with practiced efficiency, keeping her face pleasant but neutral as required. She had learned to make herself almost invisible, there when needed, gone when not. Between serving courses, Elena found herself near the baby grand piano that sat in the corner of the main dining room. A sleek Steinway, it was played during dinner service by an older gentleman named Victor, who had once performed with orchestras around the country. Now he played background music for people who barely noticed. When no one was looking, Elena sometimes let her fingers hover just above the keys, imagining the feel of them, hearing the notes in her mind. She never dared to touch it. "Dreaming again?" asked Zach, another server, as he passed with a tray of drinks. Elena pulled her hand back quickly. "Just checking for dust." "Sure you were. Hey, did you hear about tomorrow? Big party coming in. Some tech billionaire guy is hosting a dinner for investors. Management's going crazy getting ready for it. Great. Rich people being extra demanding. Can't wait." The lunch shift ended at 3 p.m., giving Elena a 2-hour break before dinner service began. Normally she would go to the park across the street, eat a small lunch and rest her feet. Today, with the double shift ahead, she needed real rest. The break room had an uncomfortable couch, but it was better than nothing. As she closed her eyes, Elena found herself thinking about the piano. In her mind, she was playing on a grand stage, not serving food to people who looked through her. The dream was so vivid she could almost hear the applause. "Elena, break's over!" Diane's voice shattered the daydream. Dinner service was always more intense than lunch. The Gilded Rose transformed in the evening with dimmed lights, candles on every table, and higher expectations. The wee Friday morning arrived too quickly. Elena's body protested as she dragged herself from bed after just 5 hours of sleep. The double shift yesterday had left her drained, but today promised to be even more challenging. The special event, the Wells party, had the entire staff on edge. She found Nana Lucia already awake, sitting at their small kitchen table with a cup of tea. "You should have woken me," Elena said, kissing her grandmother's cheek. "You needed the sleep." "Besides, I'm not helpless yet." Nana Lucia patted Elena's hand. "I made you some toast." Elena smiled gratefully, though her stomach twisted with anxiety about the day ahead. "Thanks, Nana. The big event is tonight. The one with the rich people?" "The richest." Elena sipped her coffee. "Harrison Wells is some big tech genius who made billions with his software company. Apparently he buys out a restaurant once a month for private parties. This month it's the Gilded Rose. Well, rich or poor, they all put their pants on one leg at a time," Nana Lucia said with the wisdom of her years. "Maybe so, but they don't all tip the same," Elena replied with a tired smile. "And we could use a good night." The morning routine followed its usual pattern, though Elena took extra care with her appearance. For special events, Madame Beaumont expected perfection. Every hair in place, shoes polished to a mirror shine, the uniform spotless. Elena checked herself in the mirror one final time before leaving, trying to ignore the dark circles under her eyes. When Elena arrived at the Gilded Rose, the atmosphere was noticeably different. Staff scurried about with greater urgency. Fresh flowers adorned every surface, delivered just minutes earlier. The good china and crystal had been brought out, items so expensive that breakage meant automatic deduction from wages. "There you are," Diane said, appearing at Elena's side. "Meeting in 5 minutes. Madame wants to go over expectations for tonight." The entire staff gathered in the main dining room. Even the kitchen staff, usually kept hidden away, stood in their clean whites. Madame Beaumont paced before them, her elegant gray suit and perfect posture making her seem taller than her 5 feet. "Tonight is not just another service," she began, her French accent more pronounced when she was stressed. "Harrison Wells could buy this restaurant without blinking. His guests include investors worth billions and influencers who reach millions. One bad review, one complaint on social media, and our reputation suffers." She stopped pacing and looked at each staff member in turn. Everything must be perfect. The temperature of the water, the angle of the silverware, the timing of courses. Perfection is not requested, it is required. When her gaze fell on Elena, it lingered. Elena, you will be serving at Mr. Wells's personal table. A cold wave of anxiety washed over Elena. Me? But I thought Thomas usually handled the VIPs. Thomas, the most experienced server, looked equally surprised. Mr. Wells requested a female server, Madame Beaumont explained, her expression suggesting she didn't entirely approve but wouldn't argue with the client's wishes. After the meeting, the staff scattered to prepare. Elena found herself alone with Thomas, who looked relieved rather than disappointed. Lucky you, he said, but his tone suggested otherwise. What should I expect? Elena asked, sensing there was more. Thomas glanced around to ensure no one could overhear. Wells is difficult. Last month at Le Bistro, he made a server cry because the ice in his water was too cold. The month before that, he got someone fired for bringing bread 3 minutes late. Great, Elena muttered. Just be ready for anything, and don't take it personally. The restaurant closed to regular patrons at 3 o'clock to prepare for the private event. The next 4 hours were spent transforming the space according to specific instructions. Blue tablecloths instead of white. Candles of a particular height. Wine glasses positioned exactly 2 inches from the edge of the table. Elena memorized the placement of every item, knowing that precision would be essential. At precisely 7 o'clock, the guests began to arrive. Men in custom suits worth more than Elena's yearly rent. Women with jewelry that could pay off Nana Lucia's medical bills with change to spare. They moved through the space with the easy confidence of people who had never worried about a bill in their lives. Harrison Wells arrived last at 7:30, making an entrance by design rather than coincidence. Even without knowing who he was, Elena would have identified him as the center of power. People shifted toward him like planets around a sun. Despite being only of average height with thinning brown hair, his presence dominated the room. The first hour passed in a blur of champagne service and appetizers. Elena maintained the professional invisibility expected of good servers, present when needed, gone when not. She poured drinks, replaced napkins, and anticipated needs before they were expressed. So far, Wells hadn't addressed her directly, which was a relief. That changed during the main course. You, Wells said, catching Elena's eye as she served the woman to his right. His voice was neither loud nor soft, but carried the expectation of immediate attention. The fish is too cold. Elena glanced at his barely touched sea base. I'm very sorry, sir. Would you like me to bring you another? No, I don't want another piece of the same cold fish, he said, his tone making it clear he thought her stupid for suggesting it. I want you to tell the chef that a man who charges this much for seafood should know how to serve it at the proper temperature. A heavy silence fell over the nearby tables. Elena felt heat rise to her face. Of course, sir. I'll speak to the chef immediately. In the kitchen, Chef Paolo took the criticism with surprising calm. His food is not cold. I checked it myself before it went out. But for Mr. Wells, he prepared a fresh plate with practiced efficiency. Tell him this one spent extra time near the fire. When Elena returned with the new dish, Wells didn't acknowledge her. She placed it carefully before him and stepped back, hoping to fade into the background again. No such luck. Water, he said without looking up, and make sure it's not too cold this time. The request made little sense. Water was supposed to be cold, but Elena nodded and went to fetch a fresh pitcher. As she poured for him, he continued his conversation with the man to his left, gesturing animatedly. His hand caught the edge of the glass, causing water to splash onto the tablecloth. Wells jerked back as though burned, even though only a few drops had touched his sleeve. Are you serious right now? He snapped, looking at Elena with genuine anger. I'm so sorry, sir, she began, reaching for her towel. Is this your first day? Or are you just naturally incompetent? His voice rose, drawing attention from throughout the restaurant. I'm trying to conduct business here, not sit through dinner service at a training restaurant for remedial staff. Elena's hands trembled as she tried to blot the small spill. It was an accident, sir. I apologize. An accident, he repeated, his tone mockingly sweet. Tell me, do accidents pay bills? Do accidents satisfy investors? He turned to his companions. This is exactly the problem with service these days. No standards, no consequences. Just accidents and apologies. A few of his guests laughed nervously. Others looked uncomfortable but remained silent. No one defended her. Perhaps we should get another server, suggested a woman in a red dress, clearly trying to defuse the situation. No, no, Wells said with exaggerated patience. I'm sure she can handle it. It's not rocket science, is it? He turned back to Elena. It's not like serving water requires a college degree or special talent. The irony of his statement might have made Elena laugh under different circumstances. Instead, she felt her throat tighten with humiliation. No, sir. Then please try to complete this simple task without further incidents. He waved her away with a flick of his wrist, as one might dismiss a bothersome insect. Elena retreated to the kitchen, her chest tight with suppressed emotion. She would not cry. Not here, not now, not over someone like him. Rough table? Asked Zach, noticing her expression as she leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths. Wells is living up to his reputation, she managed. Don't let him get to you. These types, they think money buys them the right to treat people like dirt. Elena nodded, though the words provided little comfort. She had bills to pay, a grandmother who needed medicine. She couldn't afford to lose this job because one wealthy man decided to use her as his evening's entertainment. The rest of the dinner service continued in much the same way. Every dish Elena brought received some criticism. The steak was undercooked, it wasn't. The wine wasn't breathing properly. It had been decanted for precisely the time requested. The dessert was disappointingly predictable. It had been specifically chosen by Wells himself from the menu options. Through it all, Elena maintained her composure, apologizing when necessary, fetching replacements that weren't needed, absorbing the small cruelties with as much dignity as she could muster. Inside, though, a different emotion was building, not sadness but anger. Who was he to treat another human being this way? What gave him the right? By 10 o'clock, as coffee was being served, Elena's feet ached and her pride was bruised, but she had survived. Most of the guests were pleasantly drunk, their conversations growing louder. Wells held court at the head of the main table, clearly enjoying being the center of attention. Then disaster struck. Another server, rushing past with a tray of cordial glasses, stumbled slightly. The tray tipped. Elena, seeing what was about to happen, stepped in to help stabilize it, but in doing so, bumped against Wells's chair. The movement caused him to slosh his coffee onto his pristine white shirt cuff. The restaurant seemed to freeze. The server with the tray vanished quickly. Wells looked at his stained cuff, then up at Elena with cold fury. That's it, he said quietly, which was somehow worse than if he had shouted. I've tried to be patient. I've tried to be understanding. But this is beyond incompetence. This is sabotage. Sir, I was just trying to... I don't care what you were trying to do. He cut her off. Results matter, not intentions. And the result is my ruined shirt and my disrupted evening. He turned to look for Madame Beaumont. I want this server removed from my sight immediately. She clearly lacks the coordination and intelligence for even the simplest tasks. The dining room filled with uncomfortable silence. A few nervous laughs came from Wells's inner circle, more out of obligation than genuine amusement. Elena stood frozen, her face burning with humiliation, as Madame Beaumont appeared at her side. Of course. Mr. Wells, please accept our deepest apologies. She gestured for Elena to follow her away from the tables. As Elena walked away, she heard Wells say to his companions, "And this is why I believe in automation. Robots don't spill coffee." More forced laughter followed her out of the room. Madame Beaumont led Elena through the swinging kitchen doors and into the small office at the back of the restaurant. The sounds of the kitchen, the sizzle of pans, the sharp commands of Chef Paolo faded as the door closed behind them. Elena stood with her hands clasped tightly in front of her, certain she was about to be fired. Madame Beaumont sighed heavily as she sat behind her desk. For a moment she looked older, the weight of running the restaurant evident in the lines around her eyes. "I'm sorry," Elena began, wanting to explain, to defend herself. "I was trying to help Ricky with the tray and..." Madame Beaumont held up a hand, stopping her. "I saw what happened." Her voice was tired but not angry. "You were not at fault." Elena blinked in surprise. "You're not firing me?" "No," the older woman almost smiled. "Mr. Wells is a challenging customer. Not our first, certainly not our last." She straightened some papers on her desk, a nervous habit Elena had noticed before. "However, I cannot send you back to his table. His displeasure would only increase." Relief washed over Elena. followed quickly by anxiety.
What would you like me to do?
I can help in the kitchen or... The phone on the desk rang, interrupting her. Madame Beaumont answered with her usual professional tone, but Elena watched as her expression shifted from polite attention to concern. I see. Yes, of course that's a problem. How long ago? No, don't bother with a doctor now, it's too late. She hung up and pressed her fingers to her temples. Perfect. Absolutely perfect timing. Is everything okay? No. Madame Beaumont looked up at her. Victor, our pianist, has apparently been fighting off a stomach bug all day. He just vomited in the employee's bathroom and can barely stand. Elena winced in sympathy. That's awful. Is he going to be all right? He'll recover, yes. But that leaves us without music for the remainder of Mr. Wells's event. She gestured toward the door. The second half of the evening, the most important part, is about to begin. The investors are moving to the Blue Room for drinks and networking. Victor was supposed to provide background music for the next 2 hours. The Blue Room was the restaurant's private event space, decorated in deep blue velvet with elegant lighting and, most importantly, a beautiful grand piano in the corner. It was the crown jewel of the Gilded Rose, reserved for the most exclusive gatherings. Can't you play recorded music? Elena suggested. Madame Beaumont's expression made it clear what she thought of that idea. Mr. Wells specified live piano music, ambient, sophisticated background music to create the proper atmosphere for his business discussions. She reached for her phone again. I'll have to call an agency, though, at this hour on a Friday night. She shook her head. The cost will be extraordinary. Elena bit her lip, a war raging inside her. She could solve this problem. But doing so would reveal a part of herself she kept carefully hidden at work. The part that didn't belong in service uniforms or carrying trays of food. The part that lived in music. I could do it, she said quietly before she could talk herself out of it. Madame Beaumont looked up, her finger poised over her phone. Do what? Play the piano. Elena's heart pounded so hard she was sure it must be visible through her shirt. I can play. Madame Beaumont's eyebrows rose slightly. You play the piano? Yes, Elena didn't elaborate. How could she explain years of lessons, competitions won, scholarships earned, dreams deferred? I can provide background music. Skepticism flickered across the owner's face. This isn't like playing at home, Elena. The Blue Room will be filled with extremely wealthy, extremely judgmental people. They expect professional quality. I understand. Elena straightened her shoulders. I can do this. Madame Beaumont studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing the risk. What sort of music can you play? Classical mostly. Chopin, Debussy, Liszt, Beethoven. Some contemporary pieces too. Play something for me. Now. The request caught Elena off guard. Here? The small keyboard, Madame Beaumont said, pointing to an electric keyboard tucked away on a shelf. Victor uses it sometimes to practice. It's not the grand, but it will do. With trembling hands, Elena set up the keyboard on the desk. It had been months since she'd played for anyone besides Nana Lucia or Mr. Chen. Years since she'd played for a stranger who might judge her harshly. She wiped her palms on her apron and placed her fingers on the keys. She chose Debussy's Clair de Lune, the same piece she'd played for her grandmother that morning. The office was silent except for the gentle notes filling the small space. Elena closed her eyes, letting her fingers remember what her mind might forget. The music flowed through her, a river finding its natural path. For those few minutes, she wasn't a server who had just been humiliated. She was just Elena, the girl who had once dreamed of concert halls. When she finished, she opened her eyes to find Madame Beaumont watching her with an expression Elena had never seen before, something like wonder mixed with confusion. Where did you learn to play like that? She asked softly. Elena shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. I've played since I was 6. My mother taught me at first, then I had lessons. I was at the National Conservatory for a semester before. She trailed off, not wanting to explain about Nana Lucia's heart attack, the medical bills, the hard choices. And now you're serving tables at the Gilded Rose. It wasn't a question, but there was no judgment in Madame Beaumont's voice. Life happens, Elena said simply. Madame Beaumont was quiet for a moment, then nodded decisively. The Blue Room. Now. Change your apron for a clean one. She stood, straightening her suit jacket. You'll play background music only. Nothing too dramatic or showy. The music should be felt, not heard, do you understand? It creates the atmosphere but doesn't demand attention. Yes, ma'am. Good. I'll introduce you as our evening pianist. No one needs to know you were serving tables 10 minutes ago. Elena followed Madame Beaumont through the kitchen and down the hallway that led to the blue room. Her thoughts raced. What would she play? How would the grand piano feel after months of practicing on her worn upright and the ancient piano at the community center? What if she froze? What if her fingers fumbled? Wait here, Madame Beaumont instructed, stopping just outside the double doors that led to the blue room. I'll announce you. Then you'll come in, bow slightly, just a small acknowledgement, and go directly to the piano. Begin playing immediately. Understood? Elena nodded, her throat too dry for words. Through the crack in the doors, she could see the blue room was already filled with guests. They stood in small clusters, crystal glasses in hand, the low murmur of conversation punctuated by occasional laughter. At the center of the largest group stood Harrison Wells holding court, his stained cuff now hidden by his suit jacket. The sight of him sent a fresh wave of humiliation through Elena. Just minutes ago, this man had mocked her, called her unintelligent, questioned her competence. And now she would play music for him. The irony was almost too much. Madame Beaumont slipped through the doors, approaching the center of the room with the practiced grace of a woman who had spent decades in fine dining establishments. She gently tapped a spoon against a crystal glass, creating a clear, ringing sound that cut through the conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Wells, she began, her French accent adding elegance to her words. While our regular pianist, Victor, has been called away unexpectedly, we are fortunate to have with us this evening a talented young musician who will provide music for your enjoyment. Please welcome Elena. The polite smattering of applause that followed barely registered in Elena's ears. Blood rushed in her head as she pushed open the doors and entered the blue room. She kept her eyes forward, not making eye contact with anyone, especially not Wells. She gave the slightest bow just as instructed and made her way to the grand piano in the corner. The Steinway was magnificent, its polished black surface gleaming under the room's subtle lighting. Elena sat on the bench, taking a moment to adjust its height. The keys seemed to glow ivory and ebony, inviting her touch. She had never played on an instrument this fine. From the corner of her eye, she could see Wells watching her with mild curiosity, clearly not recognizing her without the server's apron. The rest of the room had already returned to their conversations, dismissing her as mere background entertainment. Elena took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. The first notes of Satie's Gymnopédie No. 1 filled the room, gentle, unobtrusive, perfect background music. Her fingers remembered the piece without conscious thought, allowing her racing mind to calm gradually. As she played, she kept her head bowed over the keys, avoiding eye contact with the guests. The piano felt like heaven beneath her fingers, responsive to the slightest touch, producing a richness of tone her old upright could never achieve. Despite her nervousness, joy bubbled up inside her at the simple pleasure of playing such a magnificent instrument. She transitioned smoothly from Satie to a gentle Chopin nocturne, maintaining the peaceful atmosphere. The piece was more complex but still served as perfect background music. Elena allowed herself to relax slightly, falling into the familiar rhythm of the music. Gradually, she became aware that the noise level in the room had decreased. A few people had drifted closer to the piano, drinks in hand, listening with more attention than background music usually received. Among them was a tall woman in a deep purple dress, who watched Elena's hands with obvious appreciation. "She's quite good," the woman said to her companion, just loudly enough for Elena to hear. Came the non-committal response. "Better than I expected for a last-minute replacement." Elena kept her focus on the music, moving now to a piece by Einaudi, something more contemporary but still elegant. As she played, her confidence grew. She belonged here, at this piano, even if these people didn't know it. For the first time in years, she felt like herself again. After nearly 40 minutes of continuous playing, Elena noticed Harrison Wells approaching the piano with a young man who appeared to be hanging on his every word. They stopped nearby, Wells gesturing animatedly as he explained something about market projections and investment opportunities. "The key is timing," Wells was saying. "Anyone can recognize a good opportunity in hindsight. The skill is seeing it before others do. Elena continued playing softly, trying to fade into the background as she'd been instructed. But Wells kept inching closer to the piano, his voice rising as he warmed to his topic. He was now standing so close that his elbow occasionally bumped the piano when he gestured. "Take my latest acquisition," he continued, completely oblivious to how he was disrupting her playing. "Everyone said I was overpaying, but 6 months later the value has tripled." Elena tried to focus on her music, but Wells was practically leaning against the piano now. Her fingers stumbled over a note as his voice rose even louder. In that moment, something shifted in Elena. The same man who had humiliated her for a small accident was now carelessly disrupting her performance without a second thought. The unfairness of it lit a small flame of defiance inside her. Without fully considering the consequences, Elena's hands moved across the keyboard, subtly increasing the volume, adding more complex harmonies. The gentle background music began to transform into something more noticeable, more present. Wells continued talking, raising his voice to be heard over the music rather than moving away from the piano. Elena's fingers moved faster, the music growing impossible to ignore. She was no longer playing background music. She was playing to be heard. As the last notes of her piece faded, Elena made a decision. Her next selection would not be background music. Not even close. Elena's hands hovered over the keys for just a moment. In that brief pause, she made her choice. If this was her one chance to play on a piano this magnificent, in a room full of people who would never otherwise hear her, she would make it count. She began Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. The opening notes were gentle, questioning, like the beginning of a story. Her fingers moved with delicate precision, each note clear and purposeful. Unlike the background pieces she'd played earlier, this was music that demanded attention, music that spoke. Nearby, Wells continued his conversation, though his companion's eyes had drifted to Elena's hands on the keyboard. She ignored them both, losing herself in the music as the piece began to build. The gentle introduction gave way to more complex passages, her fingers dancing across the keys with growing confidence. The first rippling run up the keyboard turned a few heads. By the second, several conversations around the room had paused. The music filled the space with emotion, longing, struggle, determination. Emotions Elena knew intimately. Madame Beaumont appeared at the edge of her vision, a flash of concern on her face. This was not the unobtrusive background music she had requested, but Elena couldn't stop now. The music carried her forward like a river current, strong and unstoppable. As the piece built toward its first climax, Elena's body swayed slightly with the music. Her hands moved faster with more power, the notes flowing from memory she didn't know she still possessed. She had played this piece 100 times before, but never on an instrument like this, never with emotion so raw and close to the surface. The woman in the purple dress had stopped mid-sentence, her drink held forgotten halfway to her lips. Across the room, a man in a gray suit stepped away from his conversation, turning toward the piano with a puzzled expression that slowly shifted to appreciation. Even Wells had paused his monologue, though he looked more annoyed than impressed at the interruption. His companion had fully turned to watch Elena now, ignoring his boss completely. The music swelled and receded like waves, drawing the listeners along. Elena's fingers moved with increasing passion, her technical skill evident in every complicated passage. Years of practice, of discipline, of love for the music poured through her into the piano. She was dimly aware that the room had grown quieter. More people were turning, watching, listening. The background music had become the foreground, impossible to ignore. But Elena kept her focus on the keys, on the music that flowed from deep inside her. When she reached the piece's thunderous middle section, her hands moved with controlled power. The rich bass notes resonated through the floor while her right hand flew across the upper keys in rapid, precise movements. The contrast between delicacy and force, between whispering passages and crashing chords, held the room spellbound. A server entering with a fresh tray of drinks froze in the doorway, unwilling to break the spell. Madame Beaumont, who had started to approach the piano with the clear intention of asking Elena to return to simpler music, stopped and retreated, recognizing something powerful was happening. Elena had forgotten where she was. Forgotten her aching feet, her earlier humiliation, the eyes now fixed on her. There was only the music, the beautiful Steinway responding to her touch and the story she was telling through Chopin's notes. A story of struggle and beauty, of hidden depths and unexpected strength. Her own story, though no one in the room knew it. As the piece raced toward its conclusion, she finally allowed herself to look up. The room had transformed. People stood motionless, drinks forgotten in their hands, conversations abandoned mid-sentence. All eyes were on her, expressions ranging from surprise to wonder. And there, directly in her line of sight, stood Harrison Wells. His eyebrows were drawn together in confusion as he stared at her. Recognition dawned slowly on his face as he realized the pianist commanding the room was the same server he had mocked and dismissed just an hour earlier. Their eyes met briefly. Elena didn't look away. Her fingers never faltered as she held his gaze for one defiant moment before returning her attention to the music. The final section of the ballade rushed forward like a gathering storm. Her hands moved with fierce precision, every note perfect despite the speed and complexity. The emotion in the music was undeniable. Triumph over adversity, beauty rising from struggle, dignity reclaimed. With the final crashing chords, Elena poured every ounce of her being into the piano. The sound filled the blue room completely, resonating off the walls, vibrating through the floor, touching every person present. The last note hung in the air like a held breath. Then silence. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. No one spoke. The room remained frozen in the aftermath of what they had just witnessed. Elena sat still, hands resting on the keys, her breathing quick but controlled, her heart pounding in her chest. The applause began with a single person, the woman in the purple dress. Others joined immediately, the sound swelling until it filled the room as completely as the music had moments before. It wasn't the polite, obligatory applause of people acknowledging background entertainment. It was genuine, spontaneous admiration. Elena stood and gave a small, awkward bow. She had never performed for a crowd like this. Her cheeks flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. Her gaze found Madame Beaumont, expecting anger for disobeying instructions, but the older woman's face showed only astonishment. "Encore," called someone near the back of the room. "Yes, please, another," added the woman in purple. Elena hesitated, looking toward Madame Beaumont for permission. The restaurant owner gave a small nod, a gesture of surrender to the inevitable. Elena sat again at the piano. This time she chose Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, a piece famous for its technical difficulty and dramatic flair. If the ballade had captured their attention, this would hold it. The playful introduction danced under her fingers, light and teasing. From the corner of her eye, she saw Harrison Wells moving toward the piano, his expression unreadable. For a moment she feared he would stop her, complain about the volume, demand the return of unobtrusive background music. Instead, he positioned himself where he could watch her hands, his eyes intent on her fingers as they navigated the complex patterns. The piece progressed from its light-hearted opening to more challenging passages. Elena's hands crossed over each other, her fingers stretching to reach difficult intervals. Every technical challenge Liszt had written into the music, and there were many, she met with confidence born of years of practice. As she played the famous Friska section, with its rapid octaves and dazzling runs, she heard gasps from those close enough to see the blur of her fingers across the keys. The music raced faster and faster toward its conclusion, building excitement with every measure. When she struck the final triumphant chords, the room erupted in applause even louder than before. This time many of the guests rose to their feet. Elena stood, bowing again, overwhelmed by the response. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. It had been so long since she'd played for an appreciative audience, so long since she'd felt the joy of sharing her music with others. As the applause continued, she noticed Harrison Wells still standing by the piano. His face had transformed. The arrogance, the dismissive anger she had seen earlier were gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "You're the server from earlier," he said. It wasn't a question. Elena met his gaze steadily. "Yes. I didn't know you could play." The words were simple but loaded with unspoken meaning. "You didn't ask." Her voice was quiet but firm. For a moment, Wells said nothing, seemingly at a loss for words, perhaps for the first time in his life. Then, to her surprise, a small, rueful smile appeared on his face. "No, I didn't," he admitted. "A significant oversight on my part." The The woman in the purple dress approached, her eyes bright with excitement. "That was extraordinary," she said to Elena. "Absolutely extraordinary." "Where did you train?" "I studied at the National Conservatory," Elena replied. "For a short time." "Only a short time?" The woman looked genuinely puzzled. "With your talent, I would have expected—" "Life happens," Elena said simply, echoing what she had told Madame Beaumont earlier. The woman nodded thoughtfully. "I'm Diane Winters," she said, extending her hand. "I serve on the board of the symphony orchestra." Elena's heart skipped a beat as she shook the offered hand. "It's nice to meet you." "Likewise." Diane turned to Wells. "Harrison, did you arrange this? Is this why you insisted on this venue?" Wells, to his credit, didn't try to take credit for something he hadn't done. "No," he said. "This was unexpected." "Well, it's the highlight of the evening," Diane declared. She turned back to Elena. "Would you play something else for us? Perhaps some Rachmaninoff?" Before Elena could respond, more guests approached the piano, offering compliments, asking questions about her training, her favorite composers. She answered as best she could, still dazed by the sudden attention. Madame Beaumont appeared at her side, a protective presence. "Perhaps we should let Elena take a short break," she suggested smoothly. "Musicians need to rest their hands occasionally." The guests reluctantly moved away. Elena exhaled shakily, only now realizing how tense she had been. Madame Beaumont leaned close to her ear. "When you said you could play—" "I didn't realize you meant like that," she whispered, a note of wonder in her voice. "I'm sorry for not following instructions," Elena began, but Madame Beaumont waved away her apology. "Sometimes instructions should be ignored," she said. "They want more, but only if you feel up to it." Elena nodded, flexing her fingers. "I'd like to play more," she admitted. "It's been a long time since I've had an audience like this." "Or a piano like this," Madame Beaumont added with understanding. "Or that." As Elena prepared to return to the keyboard, she noticed Harrison Wells in conversation with Diane Winters and several others. They spoke in low voices, occasionally glancing in her direction. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but their expressions were serious, thoughtful. She put them out of her mind as she sat again at the piano. This time she chose Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, a piece that showcased both technical skill and emotional depth. As her fingers struck the powerful opening chords, she felt a strange sense of rightness, of coming home after a long absence for 2 hours. Elena played for the most expensive audience she had ever encountered. She moved from classical pieces to jazz standards to contemporary compositions. Each selection was met with enthusiasm, with appreciation, with respect. By midnight, when the event finally began to wind down, her fingers ached pleasantly, and her heart felt fuller than it had in years. As guests began to leave, many stopped to thank her personally, to press business cards into her hand, to ask if she performed regularly. Harrison Wells was among the last to depart. He approached the piano one final time, his manner completely transformed from their earlier encounter. "Ms. Santos," he began formally, "I owe you an apology. My behavior earlier this evening was inexcusable." Elena looked up at him, surprised by his directness. "Thank you for saying that," she replied simply. He nodded, seeming to appreciate her lack of gushing forgiveness. "You have remarkable talent," he said. "It would be a tragedy for it to remain hidden in a restaurant." Before she could respond, he handed her a business card. "Call my office on Monday. I have a proposition that might interest you." With that, he turned and left, leaving Elena staring after him in confusion. As the last guest departed, Elena remained at the piano, unwilling to leave it just yet. Her fingers moved lightly over the keys, not playing, just feeling their smooth surface beneath her fingertips. "You should go home and rest," Madame Beaumont said gently. "It's been quite an evening." Elena nodded, finally standing. Her legs felt wobbly after sitting so long, and the events of the night had left her emotionally drained. "What will happen on Monday?" she asked, glancing down at Wells's business card. Madame Beaumont smiled. "I don't know, but I suspect your life is about to change." As Elena gathered her things, preparing to catch the last bus home, she felt lighter somehow. The weight of hidden talent, of dreams deferred, had lifted slightly. Whatever came next, whether a new opportunity or just a return to her regular life, she had reclaimed something important tonight: her identity as a musician, as an artist, as someone worthy of being seen and heard. Tomorrow, she would tell Nana Lucia everything. Tonight she would hold this feeling close, this reminder of who she truly was beneath the server's uniform. The weekend passed in a blur for Elena. She spent Saturday morning telling Nana Lucia about the incredible events of Friday night, her hands moving expressively as she described the beautiful Steinway, the powerful music, and the shocked face of Harrison Wells when he realized who was playing. "I wish I could have seen it," Nana Lucia said, her eyes bright with pride. "My Elena, showing those rich folks what real talent looks like." "It felt like a dream," Elena admitted, curled up on their worn couch with a cup of tea. "I keep expecting to wake up. It's no dream, my girl. It's what you deserve." The business card Wells had given her sat on their small coffee table. Elena had looked at it a dozen times since coming home, running her fingers over the embossed lettering, wondering what Monday would bring. Madame Beaumont had called Saturday afternoon, something she'd never done before. "Are you well, Elena?" she'd asked, her voice warm with newfound respect. "Yes, just tired. It was an emotional evening." "Indeed." A pause. "Several guests have called the restaurant today asking about you. Diane Winters from the Symphony Board in particular was quite insistent on getting your contact information." Elena's heart had skipped. "What did you tell her?" "That I would pass along her number to you. Professional courtesy, you understand. Your privacy is important." Elena had thanked her, taking down Diane's number with a trembling hand. The world she had glimpsed on Friday night, a world of people who valued music, who might value her, seemed to be reaching for her. Sunday brought a surprise. Mr. Chen, her occasional piano teacher, arrived at their apartment with a small cake and enormous news. "Word travels fast in music circles," he explained, sitting at their kitchen table. "An old colleague called me this morning. He'd attended a private event where a young woman played Chopin and Liszt so brilliantly it brought the room to a standstill. When he described you, I knew immediately it was my most talented student." Elena blushed. "I was just in the right place at the right time." "No." Mr. Chen's voice was firm. "Luck may have put you in that room, but talent, your talent developed through years of hard work, is what made people listen." He leaned forward. "Now tell me everything." She described the evening in detail, including Wells's apology and mysterious business card. Mr. Chen listened intently, nodding occasionally. "Call him," he said when she finished. "And Diane Winters, too. These are opportunities, Elena, the kind that rarely come twice." "But what could they possibly want from me?" she asked. "I'm just a server who can play piano." Mr. Chen shook his head, disappointment flashing across his face. "After all these years, you still don't see it. You're not a server who can play piano. You're a pianist, an exceptional one who has been serving tables to pay bills." His words stayed with her through Sunday night as she prepared for her Monday morning shift at the Gilded Rose. She laid out her server's uniform, but found herself staring at it, Mr. Chen's voice echoing in her mind. "You're a pianist who has been serving tables." Before leaving for work, she did something she'd avoided for months. She sat at her old upright piano and played through her audition piece for the National Conservatory, the piece that had earned her a scholarship 3 years ago. Her fingers remembered every note, every nuance. When she finished, tears blurred her vision. "That was beautiful," Nana Lucia said from the doorway. "Almost as beautiful as when you played it the first time." Elena wiped her eyes. "I've lost so much practice time. But not your gift." Nana Lucia approached slowly, her hand resting on Elena's shoulder. "Call him, Elena, call both of them. See what doors might open." Elena looked up at her grandmother, concern creasing her brow. "What about your medication, the rent? Your doctor's appointments? We've managed this far, haven't we?" Nana Lucia's voice was gentle but firm. "I won't be the reason you give up your dreams a second time." Elena arrived at the Gilded Rose 10 minutes early, as always. The morning prep routine was familiar, folding napkins, polishing silverware, memorizing specials. But something had shifted. The other staff treated her differently, with a new respect in their eyes. Word had spread about her performance on Friday night. "Is it true?" Zach asked as they prepared coffee stations. "Did you really play for Harrison Wells and leave him speechless?" Elena smiled. "Something like that. And he gave you his business card?" "The Harrison Wells?" Before she could answer, Madame Beaumont appeared. Elena, may I see you in my office? The walk to the small office felt different from Friday night. Then she had been certain she was about to be fired. Now she walked with a straightness in her spine that hadn't been there before. Madame Beaumont closed the door behind them. I've been thinking about your situation, she began without preamble. My situation? You are wasted as a server. The older woman's tone was matter-of-fact. Your talents clearly lie elsewhere. I assume you'll be calling Mr. Wells today? Elena nodded. During my break, if that's all right. Take an extended lunch. Use my office for privacy. Madame Beaumont hesitated, then added, Whatever opportunity he offers, I hope you'll consider it carefully. The Gilded Rose will always welcome you as a server, but, she gestured vaguely. You belong at a piano, not carrying trays. The morning shift passed quickly. At 1 p.m., Elena found herself in Madame Beaumont's office, staring at her phone with Harrison Wells's number punched in, but not yet dialed. Taking a deep breath, she pressed the call button. A polished receptionist answered, and Elena nearly hung up. This was a mistake, surely, but she forced herself to speak. My name is Elena Santos. Mr. Wells asked me to call him today. Ah, Ms. Santos. The receptionist's tone warmed immediately. Mr. Wells is expecting your call. One moment, please. The line clicked, and suddenly Harrison Wells's confident voice filled her ear. Elena Santos. I was beginning to think you wouldn't call. I'm calling during my lunch break, she explained, then immediately regretted the words. Why remind him she was still a server? Of course. If he found this amusing, his voice didn't show it. I'll be direct, Ms. Santos. Your performance on Friday night was extraordinary. It revealed two things to me. First, your remarkable talent, and second, my own regrettable short-sightedness. Elena remained silent, unsure how to respond. I'd like to make amends for my behavior and, more importantly, ensure your talent doesn't remain hidden. He paused. Are you familiar with the Cultural Advancement Initiative my foundation runs? No, sir. It identifies exceptional talents in the arts and provides them with the resources they need to excel. Typically, we work through established institutions like the symphony, the opera, and the conservatory. Elena's breath caught at the mention of the conservatory. I've spoken with the director of the National Conservatory, Wells continued. Your former institution, I believe? They remember you quite well. Your departure was considered a significant loss to their program. Her fingers tightened around the phone. I had to leave for personal reasons. Yes, I gathered as much. Medical issues in your family, I understand. Elena was surprised by his knowledge but said nothing. The foundation is prepared to offer you a full scholarship to complete your education at the conservatory, along with a living stipend sufficient to cover reasonable housing costs and medical expenses for yourself and your grandmother. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Elena steadied herself against the desk. Why would you do this? Partially to correct an injustice, both my personal one toward you and the larger one that forces talented individuals to abandon their gifts due to financial constraints. His voice became more businesslike. But also because it's what my foundation does. We identify exceptional talent and invest in it. You are, without question, exceptional. After arranging a meeting for the following day to discuss details, Elena ended the call and sat in stunned silence. Before she could fully process what had happened, she remembered her promise to call Diane Winters as well. That conversation proved equally surprising. The symphony was launching a new community outreach program and needed a pianist who could both perform brilliantly and connect with diverse audiences. Would Elena be interested in becoming their ambassador while she completed her studies? By the time Elena returned to the restaurant floor, she felt like she was floating above the ground. Madame Beaumont took one look at her face and smiled knowingly. Good news, I see. Very good news, Elena confirmed. I'm not entirely sure it's real. It's real, Madame Beaumont assured her. Your life is changing. As it should. The rest of the day passed in a daze. Elena served her tables with her usual efficiency, but inside her mind was racing with possibilities. Return to the conservatory, play for the symphony, a stipend for Nana Lucia's medical care. Dreams she'd packed away carefully like fragile glass ornaments too precious to discard but too painful to display, were suddenly being unwrapped and held to the light. That evening, she took the bus home as usual, but nothing felt usual anymore. The city lights seemed brighter, the air fresher. At her stop, she nearly missed getting off, lost in thoughts of what her new life might look like. She found Nana Lucia at the kitchen table, a strange expression on her face. "What's wrong?" Elena asked immediately, fear cutting through her happiness. "Are you feeling okay?" "I'm fine," Nana Lucia said, waving away her concern. "But you had another visitor while you were at work." "Who?" "Diane Winters, the lady from the symphony." Nana Lucia pointed to a large envelope on the table. "She brought this for you," said it would explain everything better than she could on the phone. With trembling fingers, Elena opened the envelope. Inside were official-looking documents. A contract offering her a position as the symphony's community outreach artist, with a salary that made her gasp out loud. Along with it was a letter from the National Conservatory, confirming her readmission with a full scholarship plus stipend, courtesy of the Wells Foundation for Cultural Advancement. But what made tears spring to her eyes was the small handwritten note from Diane. "Elena, music is a gift that belongs to everyone, both those who play and those who listen. For too long, your gift has been shared with too few. We are honored to help change that. P.S. The conservatory has a rather fine Steinway that I'm told will be available for your practice sessions whenever you wish." Elena's hands shook as she showed the papers to her grandmother. "Did you know?" Nana Lucia asked after reading everything. "When you sat down at that piano on Friday night, did you know your life was about to change?" Elena shook her head. "I just wanted to play. To really play, not just be background noise." "That's why this is happening," Nana Lucia said softly. "Because you played from your heart, not for what you might gain." 3 months later, Elena stood backstage at the Symphony Hall, dressed not in a server's uniform, but in an elegant black concert dress. Through the curtain she could hear the murmur of the audience, her first official audience as a featured performer. The road to this moment had been intense. Returning to the conservatory, balancing studies with her new role at the symphony, practicing until her fingers ached in the best possible way, moving to a new apartment with proper accessibility features for Nana Lucia, learning to accept that her talent deserved recognition. "5 minutes, Ms. Santos," the stage manager said quietly. Elena nodded, flexing her fingers nervously. She peeked through the curtain, scanning the crowd. In the front row sat Nana Lucia, looking healthier than she had in years, her face glowing with pride. Beside her was Mr. Chen, her faithful teacher who had never stopped believing in her. Madame Beaumont was there too, elegant as always, with several staff members from the Gilded Rose seated nearby. And somewhat surprisingly, Harrison Wells occupied an aisle seat, his usual entourage noticeably absent. He had kept his distance during the past months, ensuring his support came with no strings attached, no obligation for gratitude. His presence tonight was the closest thing to personal involvement he had permitted himself. The house lights dimmed. Elena took a deep breath, centering herself as the concertmaster signaled for the orchestra to tune. Then the conductor appeared, the audience applauded, and he turned to gesture toward the wings where Elena waited. As she walked onto the stage, the polished surface of the concert grand piano gleamed under the spotlights. This moment, walking toward a piano before an expectant audience, had lived in her dreams for so long that its reality felt almost surreal. Elena took her seat, adjusting the bench slightly. She looked out at the audience, no longer invisible as she had been as a server, no longer background as she had been initially at the Blue Room. Here she was meant to be seen, to be heard, to share the gift she had carried within her all along. The conductor raised his baton. Elena placed her hands on the keys, feeling the cool ivory beneath her fingers. As the orchestra began the introduction to Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 1, she allowed herself one brief moment of reflection. 3 months ago, she had been a server humiliated by a wealthy patron. Tonight, she was a pianist about to perform with a professional orchestra. The journey between those 2 points contained both heartbreak and triumph, both struggle and unexpected grace. The conductor turned to her, giving the subtle nod that was her cue. Elena's fingers struck the powerful opening chords that begin the soloist's part. Bold, confident, unmistakable. As she played, the music flowing from her hands into the magnificent instrument and out into the hall, Elena realized the truth that had been waiting for her all along. She had never stopped being a pianist. Even during those years of serving tables and deferring dreams, the music had remained within her, patient, enduring, ready for its moment to resound. From the server's uniform to concert black, her outward appearance had changed dramatically. But the essence of who she was, the artist, the musician, the person of dignity and worth, had been there all along, waiting to be recognized. By others, yes. But most importantly, by herself. Patrons who came for dinner weren't just paying for food. They were paying for an experience, for status, for the right to be demanding. Elena was assigned to Section 3, which included a table of regular customers, a group of lawyers who came every Thursday to flaunt their success. They knew her name but still treated her like furniture. She served them with professional detachment, smiling when appropriate and visible when not. By 10 p.m. her back ached and her feet throbbed. She had made good tips, almost $300, but the cost was physical exhaustion. As the restaurant emptied, Elena began the closing duties, clearing tables, rolling silverware for the next day, refilling salt and pepper shakers. "You did good tonight," Madame Beaumont said, appearing silently behind her. The owner of the Gilded Rose was a small woman with perfect posture and keen eyes that missed nothing. "The guests in Section 3 asked for you specifically." "Thank you, ma'am," Elena said, surprised by the rare compliment. "I need all my best staff tomorrow night. The Wells party is very important to this restaurant." "I'll be here," Elena promised, though her body begged for rest. The night bus was nearly empty. Elena leaned her head against the window, watching the city lights blur as they passed. In her bag was a container of leftover risotto, a luxury allowed by the chef who hated waste more than he disliked the staff. It would make a good breakfast for Nana Lucia. It was almost midnight when Elena unlocked the apartment door. Nana Lucia was asleep, the TV still on with the volume low. Elena turned it off, adjusted her grandmother's blanket, and went to the kitchen to count the day's tips. After setting aside money for rent, utilities, and medications, there wasn't much left. Still, it was enough to keep going another day. Before sleep, despite her exhaustion, Elena sat at the piano. She played softly, her fingers finding comfort in Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. The music filled the small apartment with something greater than their struggles, something that transcended the day's indignities. In these moments alone, playing in the quiet darkness, Elena remembered who she really was beneath the server's uniform. Not just someone who carried food and endured rudeness, but an artist with fire in her heart and music in her soul. Tomorrow would bring more of the same. Early mornings, demanding customers, aching feet. But for now, in this moment with the piano, Elena was free.